There is a really great article on Quartz about the impact of mass incarceration on crime. And remember that the United States has one of the highest incarceration rates in the world, rivaled by the likes of countries such as North Korea. So there's this idea that if you take past and would be future criminals off of the street, you increase safety, you decrease crime. Pretty logical, right? Turns out it's not really that logical, and the argument is actually twofold. So let's take a look at each piece in turn. Argument one for incarceration is you reduce crime by taking criminals off of the street so that they don't then go out and commit more crimes. And the second part of the argument is by incarcerating a lot of people for a long time, you discourage would-be criminals from committing crime. Sort of like, I guess, the deterrent effect, Lewis, that we hear about sometimes with talks about the death penalty.
Yes, which, of course, we know is not a deterrent.
And as it turns out, neither of these arguments are true when it comes to the impact of mass incarceration on crime reduction. There's a very good new paper from the University of Michigan economics professor Michael Mueller-Smith, and it measures how much does putting criminals in prison reduce crime. And he looked at records from Harris County, Texas, from the period ranging from 1980 to 2009, and he observed that in Harris County, people charged with similar crimes received very different sentences depending on which judge randomly was assigned their case. So Mueller-Smith then tracked what happened to each of these prisoners, and he estimated that each year in prison actually increased the odds that a prisoner would reoffend by 5.6% per quarter spent in prison. A quarter, of course, 3 months. Even people who went to prison for lesser crimes ended up committing more serious offenses subsequently, the more time they spent in prison. So any benefit was the conclusion from Mueller-Smith. Any benefit from taking criminals out of the general population was more than offset by the increase in crime from turning small offenders into career criminals. Now, there's another completely common sense element to this thing, which is the longer you're in prison, the more difficult it is to find so-called honest work when you leave prison because it's more difficult to adjust. You'll be more behind socially, technologically, and thus it is just more likely, Lewis, that the longer you're in prison, the fewer options you'll have other than turning to crime, often more serious crimes than the ones that got you in prison to begin with.
Yeah, and I mean, because of the situation in this country, I think we should have more social programs to help with that. But David, the answer is simple. If you're going to send someone to prison, it's all life sentences from here on out. You got to
Exactly.
keep
The
them
way to
that.
prevent this is just by giving everybody a life sentence, no matter what it is. So forget about 20 years for marijuana possession. Let's up that even more. Prison destroys your earnings potential. Being a convicted felon disqualifies you from many jobs, from living in certain places, voting, and Mueller-Smith estimates that each year in prison reduces the odds of post-release employment by 24%, and of course increases the odds that you will live on public assistance. Talk about fiscal conservatism. It is expensive to have prisoners in prison, but it's also expensive after they get out because it increases the odds that those prisoners will end up receiving welfare benefits of various kinds. There is nothing fiscally conservative about this mass incarceration policy of the US, and there is really no good crime reduction argument to be made either.
I remember us talking about the cost of incarcerating someone for a year, and I believe it was up to around the price of a year at an Ivy League school, was it not?
It was similar in many cases, yeah. And then let's talk a little bit about the other argument, which is that this incarceration policy functions as a sort of deterrent, right? And Mueller-Smith ran the numbers and estimates that a 1-year prison sentence would only be worth it in terms of how much it costs and foregone economic potential if it deterred at least zero point 0.4 rapes, 2.2 assaults, 2.5 robberies, 62 larcenies, or prevented 4.8 people from becoming habitual drug users. So you could say, we'll take the cost of the incarceration. Here's how much crime would have to be deterred as a result of that cost in order to make sense. There is little evidence that there is any anywhere close to the deterrent effect that would be necessary here. And common sense also tells us a lot here. The possibility of a longer prison sentence is really too far away to pose as a deterrent. And number two, even after you turn 18, there's still uncertainty about the length of prison sentences. I know we have mandatory minimums for repeat offenders and this type of thing, but broadly speaking, there is not enough of an incentive to just say, well, I might get caught and I might be prosecuted and I might be convicted, and here's the range of sentences I might get. It's just not enough of a deterrent, unless you want to do what Lewis said, which is it's a life sentence for any petty crime, which is absurd.
And you know what? I'm sure the private prison industry would love to do that. I think eliminating private prisons is an important step here.
More police does have an impact on reducing crime. Longer sentences does not have an impact on reducing crime because of how risk is perceived. If you see much more of a police presence, that is a direct impact on making you less likely to commit crimes. The idea that very far down the line you might end up with a long prison sentence does not seem to deter people from committing crime. There's some parallels here, Lewis, sort of to how we fight the so-called war on terror.
Yeah, I think so. It's you know, a lot of money being spent for no good reason.